I would like to answer the question regarding Bill Gates, who clearly is a very intelligent man. And he and his wife Melinda, through their foundation, have been pushing genetically engineered foods very ardently because I think they believe they're doing good. And why do they believe that GMOs are good and are the answer, one of the big answers to the issue of growing better food and feeding people in the third world? Two basic reasons. First, he's been misled about the biological science by many of the scientists whom he's surrounded himself with, many of whom work for Monsanto or are pushing GMOs in other ways. So he thinks these foods have been well tested and are safe. And because, as we know, he believes in high technology, he thinks this is one of the gifts of high technology, and it's going to work for the betterment of humanity. So he's been misled about the biological science and somewhat ignorant about it because he's been listening to the wrong people. But unfortunately and quite ironically, he has ignored quite a bit of computer science, which, as I say, is very ironic given the fact that the money he's spending was earned through computer programming and getting a monopoly on one of the popular systems early on and then keeping that monopoly for a long time. Now, in computer science and software engineering, there are two basic categories of software. There's basically life-critical software and everything else. Life-critical is not what Microsoft was doing. Life-critical software is software that if it malfunctions, human life is probably going to be lost. Although Microsoft probably killed a lot of people out of frustration when earlier versions of Windows crashed. But still, let's not look at those heart attacks. But life-critical software is the software that governs pacemakers or X-ray therapy machines, or in the case of aviation, serve as airplane guidance systems. Those software, those packages, when even the most minuscule revision is made by the very people who wrote the program to improve system performance and safety, regulators presume, they can't argue substantial equivalence, they presume that some perturbation to the system occurred which could cause malfunctions in unexpected ways, and the developers have to put that system through all sorts of tests all over again and demonstrate to reasonable certainty that there won't be harm in the system. And they wrote the system. Now, you turn around, because it's well known in any software system now that when it reaches a certain level of size and complexity, there's no way to do a precise surgical change that will not entail risks of unintended consequences. Even the people that wrote the systems reach a certain level of size and complexity, they become nonlinear and unpredictably nonlinear. So software engineers have learned the hard way that they have to test. Even the non-life critical gets tested. But the life critical, it's required that it gets tested. Now, the FDA's Division of Medical Devices, if the developers of a pacemaker software want to make a precise change to improve it, as I said, you can't argue substantial equivalence. You prove that nothing got messed up, and extensive regression testing, very rigorous and very expensive. You go down to another building in the FDA, to the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Monsanto or DuPont comes in, they've just made a radical revision to the world's biggest, most complicated, and least understood information systems. And the FDA says, we assume nothing bad happened. You don't even have to test it. That's the way it is in the US. The FDA says you don't have to test. We presume it's all safe. Is that schizophrenia within one agency, let alone within society? So if Bill Gates dropped out of college early, he was so brilliant, he could make a fortune without understanding probably a lot of the theory of software engineering. I have a feeling he doesn't understand, this is just my feeling, that he doesn't understand life-critical software and the need for that kind of testing. I really believe that if you read Chapter 11 of my book, which is Overlooked Lessons from Computer Science, the inescapable risks of altering complex information systems, he would do a turnaround. And I'm hoping somebody he knows who's read my book will give it to him and say, read this. And I think we'll see a dramatic change, not only in their foundation, but then through a ripple effect, big one, through the world.
I think they call it the 737 MAX.
I wanted to go harder on Bill Gates, but that was good. And what he's doing is absolutely unacceptable. He's speaking in ignorance from a place of great power. He spent and I've heard him say just straight up, it's not that he doesn't have access to the information. It's that he does not want to hear or see the information that you're giving. He has in charge of his agricultural development team a former Monsanto guy, Rob Horsch, who spent 30 years trying to sell that technology within his own company as a pro-poor technology, which it absolutely was not and never that. And then he moved that philosophy over to the Gates Foundation, where they're selling GMOs as a pro-poor technology, where they spent $3 billion in the last 10 years to feed the poor in Africa, but most of that money has been spent on scientists and groups in northern rich countries to help poor Africans feed themselves. It's an incredibly colonial mindset, and what it's really all about is, and what they're doing, and he's funding a $12 million propaganda campaign at Cornell. He's normalizing all this, is why I find it upsetting. It's not just Bayer that's paying for universities to be propaganda outfits, it's the Gates Foundation. $12 million, Cornell Alliance for Science, I've written a lot about it. It's incredibly disingenuous. They put their spokespeople out to Africa to try to convince African governments to open up African markets to industrialized food systems, and they've been very resistant to these food systems in Africa, resistant to GMOs, fertilizers, pesticide, the whole scheme, which goes together. So that needs to be challenged, and so does the idea that billionaires get to control our world and do whatever they want to do. And so is the idea that it's okay to be a billionaire. I don't think it is. And there's I don't think it is, and I think they spend an incredible amount of time convincing each other it's okay, and it's cool if you hook everyone on opioids as long as you donate to a museum. We're not going to mention that unmentionable stuff. There's a great book about this I'll just end with that I really encourage everyone to read about how incredibly impactful this whole thinking has been on our culture. It's called Winner Take All by Anand Giradis, who is a former New York Times reporter.